We're going to look at the assignment translating interiors into perspective, and what I have here is basically your template for the three views we're looking at. This is the elevation view here on the top left. Basically, it's this wall here that we're outlining. We're looking at it from this direction. So that's very important to keep in mind that we're looking at basically this wall, but we also see everything that's in front of it. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through this. This is your floor plan view. And so basically it's from above, everything on the floor here. Notice one of the key differences with this template compared to the one you probably have downloaded at this point is that I have it labeled. So we have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across the front, relates here to your floor plan. We have A, B, C, D going back. Same here for the floor plan. Here, a little bit different. This is the elevation view. This is still going back, A, B, C, D, but here we have the height done in W, X, Y, Z. You can label it however you want, whatever works best for you. Just a simple example. I think if you have some trouble with organization, this is kind of the way to go. And so what I want to start with is, let's go ahead and look at the floor plan view. And so what I want to do is draw a little simple box shape here in B3. And so right here, let me go ahead and do this in green, as we've talked about kind of that organization, craftsmanship, that consistency in our videos that we'll use in this class. So simple box shape, B3. So where is that here? So we can follow our B, our 3. Where they meet, that's where we want our box shape. And so I'm going to just draw a box on the ground plane. The grid lines in this are already in perspective. Any other lines that you draw, make sure that you draw them in perspective. Maintain that consistency of perspective. Your vanishing point's here. Your horizon line is here. If you have trouble seeing it in your template, go ahead and just draw it back in. But there you can see your vanishing point right along there labeled. So we have our box shape. So we haven't established a height for it. We've basically only transferred where it is on the ground plane. So we want to give it some height. With that in mind, I can come to B here, and how tall do I want to make it? I'm actually going to make it, let's make it 3 tall. And so you don't see the height in the floor plan view. That's where the elevation view comes in. And so I have its location of where it is on the ground plane, here and here. I have the height of it here. How do I bring that together? So what we can do at this stage is we can follow the guidelines along the wall here. We can go up 3 tall, so we're between X and W. We're in that B row, transferring it up. And we can come across with a horizontal line. Remembering 1-point perspective, these width lines and the height lines are parallel to the picture plane. And so that's why we can just come across from this grid point, create our horizontal. Let's go ahead and zoom in here a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. And we can come up from the corners up to that new line. Once we've done this, we don't need to do it in the back as well. We could do it as a check. But once we have these intersections, it's going back to that first video on 1-point perspective. And the parts that recede, we take back to the vanishing point. These back corners already predefined for us. We can bring this straight up. Where it intersects, that's that back edge. It should meet this point over here. These are kind of close to the vanishing point. This is something we'll discuss later on about trying to keep sides away from there. But for this purposes, we're going to be okay with it. We're going to let it slide just because we're using a template. It's very hard in the templates to get that individuality of avoiding this alignment. And the reason it's difficult is because we don't see this side very well. And so it can be visually a little bit awkward when we're trying to create an imagined space and maintain that illusion of depth. Now, context can help sell it if we had more going on, but for this simple example, I just want you guys to understand how to transfer shapes between these images. And so we'll go ahead and darken it in, finish that process. And remember, the blue lines are basically your 6B. The green lines are your 2B or HB. But there is your transparent shape. We're going to bring up this side as well. Bear with me 1 second. I missed one. Always important to double check yourself. And so there's our shape. We have it on the floor plan here. And so I think especially if you struggle a little bit with the idea of this, and the lesson and the reading didn't really necessarily make it clear, labeling your grid kind of keeping it organized that way and being patient really makes the difference here. Keep in mind you want to draw things in perspective, so don't start drawing cylinders, anything crazy. Keep it to simple box shapes. Keep it simple will be something you hear me say over and over throughout this class. You're just starting with perspective, and so while you may have a great deal of experience with drawing, perspective is probably new. I do expect things to be drawn in perspective correctly, and I think balancing your capabilities with your ideas is an important part of that process. Because if you start drawing a rounded couch and you just kind of draw it in, it's not really perspective anymore. You haven't really done the elliptical work that we'll do later on for making those nice round edges. We haven't done cylinder, columns, tube shapes, however you want to define them. We haven't done all of that yet. And so work with what you know. Try not to get overwhelmed. For a couch, if you think about a couch, simple L shapes work just fine. And what I mean by that is, think about a couch there. Don't get caught up in arms yet. You can draw them if you want, but keep in mind you start simple. And let me switch this to a green because it will be a guideline temporarily. But hopefully you're getting a feel for how this couch shape may or may not look. You could also go a step further, add a box shape on each end to give yourself those arms if you felt that that was necessary. I'm going to treat this shape here initially as opaque, so we're not going to see this back edge come down. But I did want to have a rough idea of where that seating was. Go back across. And so you can kind of see this very simple L-shaped seating. And then we could transfer this around. And we'll go ahead and do one last example of that, but let me darken this in. Remember, this box shape that we created first, we're treating it as opaque, so we're not seeing through it. That's why I'm not darkening the blue lines any further. That back edge would be about right here, but I don't want to include that. If we were going to include that here on the floor plan, again, we're looking at B, going back to the middle between C and D, which we can see here. And we're coming out a little more than 1.5 grid spaces. So a little more than 1.5. This is the footprint of our seating. We also need to know where this edge is. And to do that, we can draw a simple guideline down. Get a sense of where it would be. And so let me go ahead and switch that back to green. And so we're maybe a little less than halfway here in this first row going back. So a little less than halfway here. And that's the back of our seating. Whether you want to call it a couch, whatever you want to call it, those details are not as important to me as the perspective element and these spatial elements that we're looking for. And then we can come back to the elevation. Let me get rid of that here. And so we can see it goes up to the line between Y and X. It starts in B. It goes back to the line between C and D. Notice I didn't draw the line here because this object's in front. We don't see that behind here unless this is a transparent. We're treating this as it's opaque. The division here, again, we can do a guideline horizontal shifting it back. Maybe 3/4 of the way up Z. Switch that to green. And so let's see, right here is where we're looking for. So kind of a high back, low seat. We'll look at scale later on when we get to figures towards the end of the course. For right now, we don't have to worry about that. We're just looking at the consistency between your elevation view, your floor plan view, and this perspective view. And it's being patient can take this a long way in making sure that consistency. Hopefully you get a feel for how this is working. If you have any questions though, please let me know.